Okay, so this is Bible geography. This is the second semester of our Bible geography class, and this is the second lesson. And tonight we're going to continue studying about just finishing up with David and getting right into King Solomon and then the divided kingdom. So we're in chapter 9 in our Holman Bible Atlas book. And remember now, last week we studied a bit about David's geography. And what do we say about David? Where was David first made king? Where was he first made king? What city? Hebron, okay. And where was Ishbosheth's kingdom centered in? Mahanaim, right. And then, of course, David took Jebus, which was under Jebusite control, and then renamed it Jerusalem, the city of David, the city of God. And last week now, we looked at David and Solomon's kingdom in relationship to Saul, and we see how David expanded that kingdom, and then Solomon capitalized on it. Saul, his kingdom was so small because he was involved in what? Selfish, petty conflicts, and not the true battles, not the true enemies that he should have been fighting. He was more fussing and fighting and chasing around David than doing what he should have been doing. So, and we made this point last week too, and just a couple things just to do a quick review. So David's enemies on the Mediterranean Sea, the south side of the Mediterranean Sea, they were who? On the coastal plain. They were the Philistines. Now the Philistines had immigrated in from somewhere across the Mediterranean along the way, but that was the first battle we talked about. Then we talked about David's battles in the Transjordan area, and in the southern region of the Transjordan. What kingdom is there? And this is in our book. If you want to go to the book page number 104, the southern Transjordan area, the descendants of Esau. They were the descendants of Esau. They were the Edomites. Okay, so there you have descendants of Esau. Esau's brother was Jacob. So they could have had a good relationship with them, but it was rocky at times, and they had wars with them as well. And so above Edomites, you have who? The Moabites. And above the Moabites, you have the Ammonites. And they were both, Ammon and Moab were both the descendants of Lot. Those were the children born in the cave. They were the cave children of Lot through Lot's daughters. Remember that. So again, you have descendants of Israel. They could have been friends with them, got along well, but there was a rocky relationship also. Then above the Ammonites, what does it say in your notes there? What group of people there? It says, what does it say? It says Aram. You see that? Aram. Now, who is this Aram? And because in your book, it talks about the wars of David. And at the bottom of page 105, the very bottom line of page 105, it says David and the Arameans. So now the Bible, I don't know if the King James uses that phrase, Arameans. Who are the Arameans? They're the Syrians. So whenever you see Aramean in your book, just think Syria. That's the place we would be more familiar with. So don't let that throw you. But why is it called Aram? And why does the book use this term Arameans on a regular basis? And if you go to page, let's see here, there's a whole section here about this. On page, we're going to just go to page 124. If you could just go up there real quickly. And it talks about the Arameans, the kingdom of Aram - Damascus. So again, Damascus is the capital of Syria. So whenever you see Aramean, think Syria, think Damascus as at least a center of it. It wasn't always the strength of it, but nevertheless. So look at this first paragraph here, and it talks about how on page 124, the very top, fine print. This is actually a pretty interesting little thing here. The Arameans occupied Syria, the regions around Habor, these rivers, Mesopotamian area from where Abraham migrated. Israel recalled an ancestral connection with the Arameans. I was a wandering Aramean was my father. In the biblical genealogies, the Arameans are described as descendants of Aram, grandson of Abraham's brother Nahor. So again, the Arameans and these Syrians that David was fighting against are also related in some ways to Israel, more distant here, because Nahor was Abraham's brother, and the grandson of Nahor, I don't even know, I get lost in all these kind of things, but the grandson of Abraham's brother Nahor was Aram. And that's in your Bible. It's always good to put your eyes on it. Go to Genesis 22 and verse number 20, and that's where we see Aram. So that's where the term Aramean comes from. Okay, long-winded explanation of why Aramean is in your book. Genesis 22 verse 20, where it says Huz is firstborn and Buz, Huz and Buz. Hey, what's your brother? Huz. What's his brother? Buz. Huz and Buz. It sounds like bugs, you know. Put up the bug light, you'll catch them. Huz and Buz. Okay, I'm sorry. And it says, and Kemuel, the father of Aram. There it is. So Aram is there, this descendant, and now they're the Arameans, and now they're fighting David. Okay, so these are his enemies all around. They're actually his descendants that he's warring against. And so this was not in your notes, but we spent a bit of time on this just to review. Who was the major Aramean thorn to David, who David fought at least twice and probably 3 times? His name was Hadarezer or Hadarezer. Okay, so that's in your book as well. And so you might want to make definitely a note of that. That's on page 105. The first column, about the 4th line down. David's principal opposition came from Hadarezer, the king of Zobah, which was up in that region. And then you could see that on that map across the page as well on page 104. Okay, so any questions about that? About David? Yes, Micah?
I can't find it in my book where I was reading it, but it was saying that Jerusalem was actually called Jerusalem further before that. And of course, I know Melchizedek, king of Salem, but I guess I didn't realize that, like, in 1200 BC, in some Egyptian, whatever, it was called Jerusalem. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Is that what you understand?
I'm not sure. Honestly, I don't know. I'm ignorant about that. When
page 112, Canaanite and Jebusite Jerusalem. Page 112.
Jerusalem appears more frequently.
Of Jebusite Jerusalem.
Yeah. And Jerusalem appeared by naming Egyptian.
I'm not sure when it was first called Jerusalem. It was a Jebusite city, however. Yeah. King of Salem. I'm not. Yeah. Okay. So let's go to Solomon then. Let's continue talking. So we also talked a bit about Solomon. And so we're saying that Solomon had these strong ties to the Phoenician king Hiram, which David had established those relationships. And then really Solomon continued and strengthened and capitalized on that. So again, if you look at your map on page 106, around in there, where the kingdom of David and Solomon, and just to get a picture of this. And if you weren't here, some of you were not here the first semester. So what we learned the first semester, some of the key points was that along the coastline of the Mediterranean, what was that region called? We said that was the coastal plain. And along the coastal plain ran probably the most important highway in this region, and it's called the International Coastal Highway. And you can see that on page 106, that red line that goes up the coastal plain, and it cuts across right at, you see where it says Megiddo? That's the Jezreel Valley. That's where Armageddon is. And that was important region because it was where they could cross from the coastal plain and go more inland. Remember, because going up Israel were mountains. So it was always, the question was how to cross through here, because there were mountains. So it wasn't until you came up to Megiddo that they found that was the best pass, and then get up here to Damascus. Okay, so that's the International Coastal Highway. And then the other major road begins down in Ezion Geber. So now go to 1 Kings chapter 9, and we actually hit across this in our first semester because it says in 1 Kings chapter 9, right at the very bottom on page verse 26, what is Ezion Geber said to be on the shore of? In 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 26, the Red Sea. And this is the Gulf of Aqaba. And we made a big thing about that actually the crossing of the Red Sea was across the Gulf of Aqaba, which is on the other side of the Sinai Desert. We won't go into that, but just to remind you, that's called the Red Sea there, the Gulf of Aqaba. And it's here now, you see that David conquered this territory, and Solomon is going to capitalize on it because Hiram, who is the king of Phoenicia up in this region, they were expert seamen. And so this verse says that Solomon made the ships. He could do that piece, but he didn't have the expert sailors or shipmasters. But Hiram did. So it says in 1 Kings 9:27, Hiram sent in the navy of his servants shipmen that had knowledge of the sea, and with the servants of Solomon. And it says they came to Ophir and fetched from thence what? Gold. Now, we know in Africa there's a lot of mines to this day, a lot of precious stones and things of that nature. So Solomon had his ships go down. And if you look at the map then, on page number 107, and you see where you see the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Aqaba goes to the right, and then the rest of that sea is called the Red Sea. So the Gulf of Aqaba is called the Red Sea, as well as the whole bottom below that. But that's where Solomon's ships went, all the way down the Red Sea. And what's at the bottom of Arabia there that you see? Sheba. So who hears about Solomon? The Queen of Sheba. And what's across the Queen of Sheba there? Ophir. What's there? The gold. And so the Queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon because of the ships going up and down the Red Sea there. And she comes, of course, and the very next chapter of 1 Kings chapter 10 gives you that meeting between Solomon. The very next verse, 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 1, it says, and when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon. So seeing the geography here, we understand now, we can make that connection. If you're just reading along, you're like, well, how did that all happen? But if you're actually looking at the geography of it, that Hiram gave him these shipmen, and they went to Ezion Geber, and then from there they went down to Ophir, and then boom, now we understand why the Queen of Sheba comes to see Solomon. So you got on page 4, you have letter A at the bottom, point 1. Solomon had a strong tie with the Phoenician king. You have that right? Yes. And the next blank was what? Sailors. Okay. And then we kind of finished there, and we read some of these verses as well, and we're just to hit them again. You read King chapter 10, verse 22. I love that. That's a good memory verse. But we won't do this one. But it says, and the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish with a navy of Hiram, Once in 3 years came the Navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, and apes and peacocks. You just gotta love the Bible, you know. This is a variety of apes and peacocks coming from Spain and from across the Mediterranean into Israel. So now page 5. So this mutually beneficial relationship strengthened both Tyre and Israel. The Phoenicians gained access to new markets. Solomon added sea trade to his economic activity. Okay, so that's where we stop, right?
Yes.
Okay, letter B. Solomon's wise building program. Extensive construction took place that really built up, strengthened even further the infrastructure of his kingdom. So look on that page 55, and that's page 108. If you can look there, and we'll see 3 areas of building in Solomon that strengthened him. Number 1, cities protecting the trade routes. Cities protecting the trade routes. Now you want to, on this, now go to page 109, go to the second paragraph down where it says Solomon rebuilt several strategic strongholds that guarded the major routes and functioned as key administrative centers. 1 Kings 9:15. Go there, 1 Kings 9:15. And I'll read the verse that says, this is the reason of the levy or the tax which King Solomon raised for to build the house of the Lord and his own house and Millo and the wall of Jerusalem. And notice these 3 cities, Hazor and Megiddo and Gezer. Okay, so Solomon built these 3 cities. Do you see them in your map 55? What were the 3 cities? Megiddo, which is up here, and Gezer. I put them with pink stars on this map. Gezer, I want you to find them though. And where? Hazor, which is like 10 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. And in your book, they have green boxes around them. Now, what are those cities on? They're right on the trade route. So by building up those cities, he's controlling the trade routes, and he's able to strengthen those ties and strengthen the nation economically so he can have financial controls about what's going on there. So he's building up these cities. It says he built his own house, but then he built those cities of Hazor, Megiddo. Then it says that even in the next verse, for Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and taken Gezer, burned it with fire, slew the Canaanites that dwelt there, and gave it for a present to his daughter, Solomon's wife. So here's a burned city, Solomon. But Solomon is what? He'll say, thanks a lot. Because what is he going to do? He's going to build it up. And where is that city? Gezer. And where, can you see it? Can you find it?
Yeah.
It's down in the Philistine area, but it's just off the coastal plain, but it's right on what? It's right on the trade route as well. So that was a key city, and Solomon was happy to have it. Okay, and then it says Solomon built. He gave it to Solomon. The very next verse, Solomon built it. He built Gezer, and he built Beth Horon. Do you see that in your notes? Sometimes you got to really look carefully, but that's what we're doing in this class. See Beth Horon? It's west of Jerusalem, a little bit north of Jerusalem. You see Beth Horon? It's up here with this red star. I put this star red. So we have Gezer down here, Beth Horon, and then it says and Baalath. And Baalath. And you see Baalath? It's just right below Gezer over there. So what are these cities? These cities are protectors of Jerusalem. And this is across the page. If you look on page 109, in 1 Kings 9, it has those verses we just read, 17 and 18, refers to other sites refortified during Solomon's reign. Baalah and Lower Beth Horon, guarded passes leading from what? The coastal plain into the heart of Judah. Okay? So here, by strengthening these cities, what is he really strengthening? Jerusalem. He's protecting Jerusalem. He's protecting Jerusalem. Okay, so he's thinking economically to get economic strength, but he's also thinking protection. So that number 2 is cities protecting Jerusalem. And number 3, cities protecting Israel from the south. That's number 3. The blank is south. And the city there in verse number 18 is Tadmor. And in your book, he basically says this city down here, Tamar, is the same as Tadmor. So it's below the Red Sea in this Negev area.
Patrick, the map is Beilath. It's the same as Beilath beer, or is it 2 different things?
I just see Beilath right along the coastal area. Beilath.
But there was Beilath.
Oh, Beilath beer.
Oh,
It's
okay,
a different,
okay,
yeah.
Okay, I said Beilath. Okay.
Okay, and so Solomon built these different cities. Okay, a little bit of the geography of that. And because of this, look at verse 27 now. Look at verse 27 of 1 Kings 10. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 27. So through all of this, even back up to verse 26, it says, Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen, which he bestowed in the cities for chariots with the king. So he built up these cities and then he fortified them with chariots, with military strength. And then it says the king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones. In other words, through the trade and by going to, down into Africa, he got gold, silver. Silver was as common as stones. And he says, and sycamore trees that are, and cedars made he to be as the sycamore trees that are in the vale. So in other words, there he's saying that the cedar trees, which is a higher and stronger quality of wood, became as common as the sycamore tree. And the sycamore tree, he says, is in the vale. Now, if you look up that Hebrew word, you know what that Hebrew word vale is? It's Shephelah, or the Shvela. Remember the Shvela area, which is like this region across after the coastal plain. The Shvela was in this region, but this word Shvela is actually found it, and it's translated Low Country. And so it's the plain region. It's not in the mountains, but it's down in the plains. But that's where these sycamore trees. So anyway, he's saying that the cedar trees were as abundant as the sycamore trees. Silver was as abundant as stone. And then he says, and Solomon, verse 28, had horses brought out of Egypt, linen yarn, and the king's merchants received the linen yarn at a price. So Solomon became a broker. He became a middleman in this trading with horses and also military equipment and chariots. And for it says in verse 29, a chariot came up and went out of Egypt for 600 shekels of silver. That's how much it cost. And a horse for 150. So they were selling, Solomon was buying chariots from Egypt, and then as a broker, he was selling them to Syria. Not such a smart move, really, because they could use them in a fight against them. But that's kind of what's going on in that verse. Solomon is trading, acting as a broker, a merchantman, and says, so all the kings of the Hittites and for the kings of Syria, did they bring them out by their means? So what he's saying there is they brought the chariots and horses around, he bought them, and then he sold them to the Hittites and to the Syrians for a price. So Solomon got rich. We know he was rich. This is how. Okay, so by understanding the geography, it kind of gives us a better sense of his wealth, his trade, his business strategy, this kind of thing. Okay? All right, so you got those blanks, 1, 2, and 3? So he strengthened the infrastructure, cities protecting what? The trade routes, Jerusalem, and the southern region, controlling it, strengthening it all. Then number 3, Jerusalem, the city of David. So we're just going to go over this pretty quickly. I really wish, when I read this section, Micah, maybe you could give us better insight on this, but I really wish when I read through this section that I'd been in Jerusalem. So let me just give a few blanks, and if you want to give any personal insight into the height, I guess I'm especially interested in the height of Jerusalem compared to the region around it, and the valleys around Jerusalem from at least what I read here. So you could think about that. But number 3 is Jerusalem, the topography of Jerusalem. And I'm getting this right out of the book. These 3 blanks here, I'll tell you where I'm getting them on page 111. If you go there, the first paragraph, what is on all sides of Jerusalem? It says it right there in the 3rd line down.
Some ridges.
On page 111, what's on all sides of Jerusalem? It says
Valley.
deep valleys. So that's the blank, number 1, under letter number 3, letter A, number 1. Deep valleys surrounded Jerusalem on all sides. And then we've heard some of these valleys in the eastern ridge, the Mount Scopes, the Mount of Olives, and so forth. And you could see the picture there below that. You could see the Kidron Valley. And then you also can see this other transversal valley, the Hinnom Valley. So you see these valleys around Jerusalem. And then we see the city of David. And I was able to find a few pictures, like here's David's Jerusalem. So, and here are the valleys, like here's the Kidron Valley, the Central Valley. And of course, in the Bible, when they talk about going to Jerusalem, it's always going up. They went up. So then the next blank would be, what provided the water? What was the water source for this area? It was the Gihon Spring. That's, again, the 3rd line down. You might want to star that in your book. The Gihon Spring provided water to the southern end of Jerusalem. And then he says David expanded on the next column on page 111. He expanded Jerusalem northward upon the northern part of the eastern ridge known as Mount Moriah. Okay, so again, if you look here, you'll see here's the city of David, and then Mount Moriah is north of that. And then, of course, Solomon built, even with the temple that Solomon built and the structures around it, the royal complex that he built, he made it even larger. I think that's a pretty cool picture of ancient Jerusalem. Okay. So when you read that, Micah, can you give any, or I don't know, do you want to say anything or give any other insights as far as Jerusalem? And
Sure. I was just looking for some of my pictures from Israel that maybe I can text people later. It's, I'm from Colorado. And so when they talk about the mountains there, it's not like the mountains that you see in America. It's almost more like hills. So it doesn't feel like you're going up a mountain to go to Mount Moriah. It's just kind of hills. Yeah. But when you go to the Temple Mount area, then you do go down in a valley and over to the Mount of Olives. But it's a quick walk. So it would take you 10 minutes to get from the city of David down a valley and then up to the Mount of Olives. So it's not far. And then usually that picture that you see, that's kind of a horizontal picture of Jerusalem where you see the Temple Mount and, the gold dome, it's usually taken from Mount Scopus or the top of the Mount of Olives. So that's usually where they take that. So you see it, but I guess you don't sort of realize where the picture is being taken. It's down in a valley and then back up. And interestingly, in the valley is a lot of cemeteries, sarcophaguses and stuff like that.
Do you know, where's the Wailing Wall? Do you know where the Wailing Wall would be in relationship?
So if the Mount of Olives is here and you go down in the valley and then come back up to the temple, then the Wailing Wall is on this side.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And the Wailing Wall, they say, is the only piece that's left of the original temple.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's not really very big, is it? So
It's not that big.
sometimes you see pictures and it looks really big, but then I've seen other pictures and it's like, wow, it isn't. It's kind of like Mount Rushmore. People, when they go to Mount Rushmore, at least from what I've heard, I want to see Mount Rushmore, but I've never seen it. But people have told me it's not as big as you think it would be, you know. But neither is the Statue of Liberty either. So, okay, any questions about that, or did anybody want to ask Micah anything else about the city of Jerusalem?
Do they still wail?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, anytime you go there, I mean, I think what you don't realize is usually what you're looking at, from what I remember, is where only men can go.
Yeah.
So there's a separate area where the women can go, and then last semester I showed you, like, this is the wall, the men are going here, the women I believe are going over here to the wall, and then there's kind of an underground area right here where actually there's a lot more people that you never see in photos, and they're sort of they're in an enclosed area of the Western Wall where there's libraries, so they're the serious ones who are praying with the the phylacteries on and stuff like that. So it's almost like this is the tourist area, and then the part that you never see is where a lot of the main people go.
All right. Thank you. Okay, and then to finish up this chapter, he speaks a bit about Solomon's temple. And of course, this was Solomon's most famous accomplishment, page 6. We're on page 6 there, was the building of the temple. And a number of chapters are given to this. Solomon raised the levy out of all Israel. It says that 30,000 men and others as well, no doubt, oversaw the building of the temple. David helped prepare much for it, but then Solomon as well worked very hard. And this temple stood for 350 years before it was destroyed by the armies of Nebuchadnezzar. It was 350 years. And number 3 there should be 3. 7-year project. It was a 7-year building project. In 1 Kings chapter 6, verse number 38, we read of that. He was 7 years in building it, the very last phrase of 1 Kings 6 and verse number 38. And another thing just kind of interesting about the temple, and there was an interesting video. This picture I just screenshotted from a YouTube video that I saw about the temple, and it got into some of the real details of the temple and why they believe it was constructed similar to this. Of course, no one exactly knows, but this is a rendition of what they came up with looking at the details of the Bible. For example, you see the storage rooms on both sides and all around except in the front. And that's what it says in 1 Kings chapter 6 and verse number 5, where it says, 1 Kings 6 and verse 5, it says, and against the wall of the house he built chambers round about, against the walls of the house round about, both the temple and the oracle, and he made chambers round about. And then it even says that the most chamber was 5 cubits broad, the middle 6, and the third 7 cubits broad. And so you see how it's kind of stepped up a little bit there in the picture, or maybe it's, I don't know, but anyway, they explained it really interesting though why they pictured it this way. Anyway, there's storage rooms around the temple, and of course the laver there on the one side, and the brass altar, and then other things that they had, and the columns. This is a little more colorful, a little brighter view of Solomon's temple. So, yeah. Okay, so here are some questions that might be that might be of value for you. What king helped Solomon with his seafaring activities? And he was from where? He was a Phoenician king of Tyre. Yeah, you could say of Tyre, king of Tyre, a Phoenician king. Okay, and what Syrian was most oppressive to David, or David had to put him down a number of times? Okay, Hadarezer. I like Hadarezer, I have to say. Have you ever heard a sermon on Hadarezer? I don't think so. So that would be a good study. Okay, and just some of those high points like that would be good. And Solomon's building program, of course, was to protect what? Two main things: to protect the trade routes and Jerusalem. Okay, so that's good. All right, so let's move forward here. The kingdoms of Israel and Judah, chapter 10. So we're in chapter 10. The death of Solomon was in 722 BC. It marked the end of an era when one king exercised authority over all the tribes of Israel. 922 BC, he died. Literally 200 years to the year, the northern kingdom. That's interesting. After this, after Solomon, two independent governments emerged. The northern kingdom, Israel, that's the blank there, Israel, and the southern kingdom of Judah. You know that. Israel is the north, Judah is the south. The northern kingdom, Judah, survived for 200 years after Solomon, from 922 to 722. What is the northern kingdom often called? It's often called Ephraim. Why Ephraim? Because that son of Joseph became the most prominent, largest tribe, and the tribe where some of the key cities as well were in. So it's often called Ephraim. So when you read in the prophets, especially Ephraim, he's talking about the northern kingdom. Now, Israel was wealthier than Judah, and we'll see why. It extended from Bethel in the south to Dan in the north. Okay, so look in your notes, look in your book, I should say. Look on page 57. Page 57. Map 57, correct. Page 118. Map 57 on page 118. So why would Israel be a wealthier nation, separate nation, than Judah? Look at your map. Why would it be?
What's the question, Pastor?
Why would Israel be a wealthier nation than Judah? Sid?
It has the trade route.
Exactly. Yeah. It has the trade routes running through it. How many trade routes, major trade routes, are running through Judah? None, as far as the red ones. There are, of course, there's some trading and so forth, but we'll see that not the major ones. So that's important. It was the two major highways did ensure its commercial wealth. Letter C, the Phoenician cities to the north now became an inroad, not just for interaction, for trading and prosperity of the nation, but what was imported into Israel through Phoenician kings and queens? Baal worship. So that's letter C. Phoenician cities to the north were an inroad for Baal worship that Elijah and Elisha both had to strongly oppose about 850 BC. And the northern kingdom, there's two things. I want you to add something here as well. I want you to add that it's in your book on page 115. You go back to page 115, and it tells you the three cities that served as capitals of Samaria. Do you see those three cities? Can you find them? Shechem, Tirzah, and then finally Samaria. So, and they're starred on page number. I know you gotta be very flexible in this class, back and forth. Keep your finger there on page 1. If you go back to the map 57, do you see those three cities? And they're on a major road kind of going through the center of Israel, but Samaria, Shechem, and Tirzah. So those were the three cities that served as their capitals. But here's what gave Israel instability. What does it say on that column? How many kings, how many different family lines served as the kings of the northern kingdom? How many family lines? on page 115. It's in the same paragraph that says Shechem, Tirzah, and Samaria, like the fourth line down from there. How many? Okay, exactly. Okay, there you go. The kings of Israel came from how many different families? 9. Now, the chart on page 117, you have to memorize this chart and every name and every date on it. Okay? I'm just kidding. Actually, you don't have to memorize this, but you know what? Know this is here because it's an excellent resource. Because sometimes you might want to say, where's a listing of the kings? You know, where can I put all this together? So here's a very good resource. And on it's chart 9 on the right side and the kings of Israel on the right-hand side. And so the different families are bracketed off. And there should be 9. Okay? And meanwhile, as far as the kings of Judah, how many family lines ruled over Judah?
1.
There was 1. They were all from the family of David, except there was the usurper Athaliah, but then she was put down. Okay, so that's just a little overview on Israel, the northern kingdom, a little overview about Judah, the southern kingdom. Now Judah survived for 336 years, so 136 years more than the northern kingdom. So why is that? Well, your book makes the point, the author makes the point that, and I'm reading again from page 115. What does it say? Judah was more geographically what? And that's the blank in Israel. No international trade route crossed through her borders. So this kingdom, however, had the city of Jerusalem as its center, giving it the most prestigious city and religious shrine. That's the blanks there on letter B. The most prestigious city and religious shrine in the land. Letter C. Every king of Judah except for Athaliah came from the family of David. Family of David, that's letter C, giving Judah political stability. So whereas Israel had greater wealth, they were larger, Judah had the city of Jerusalem and the strength, of course, of the worship there and the stability of one family line of David and the promises of God going along with that. Okay, so with the division of the kingdom, there was a failed meeting in the city of Shechem. That's number 3, letter A. Solomon died. The leaders of the land met at Shechem. They were upset because Solomon was getting a lot of taxes from the northern kingdom, you know, and built all of his building projects. So it speaks about how they were deeply dissatisfied with Solomon's leadership. And then, of course, you remember the story where the young men counseled Solomon to go against the counsel of the old men. And Rehoboam, the new king of Israel, said, I'm going to make it harder than Solomon. So they broke away. So that's in 1 Kings chapter 12. And this whole chapter just summarizing that right there. So it says in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 1, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel would come to Shechem to make him the king. Shechem is right here in the center of the kingdom. That's where he went. That would become one of the capitals later on of Israel. And that's where he went, and that's where they rebelled against him. And when Rehoboam, 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 18, look at that. It says, then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was over the tribute, which is what? He was the IRS guy. He was the tax collector. Guess what they did to him when he came to collect taxes? They killed him. Tax collectors often get they have a rough life. And then who rises to be the first king of the northern kingdom? Number 3, letter B, a disgruntled Ephraimite named Jeroboam. He was a former overseer of Solomon's forced laborers. He came out of exile from Egypt. He emerged as the first king, the first leader of the northern kingdom, Israel. Okay, and let's just finish this page here. Jeroboam's new worship centers. This is perhaps, I believe, to understand the history of the Old Testament, you have to get this. This is one of the probably the most critical things to understand about the history of the Old Testament and the division of these kingdoms, Judah in the south, Israel in the north. And what did Jeroboam do? He set up a rival counterfeit religion that looked just like the Mosaic Law in some ways, but it was a counterfeit. It was ungodly, and it was full of humanism. And it featured, what did it feature? Two golden calves. That's in verse 28, 1 Kings 12, verse 28. Two golden calves, so that his citizens would feel no need to go to Jerusalem. Don't go to Jerusalem to worship. You stay right here. And he set one in Dan, that's number one, in the north. And that city became a center for worship. And that's actually interesting because Dan had relocated. And remember, they had their own, this is in the book of Judges. They brought with them their own priests, and they had their own idols. So Dan had already this idolatrous, and they had already broken away in definite ways from the Mosaic faith. So they probably went right along with Jeroboam's false religion. But then he set up in the south, he set Bethel in the south. So do you see Bethel? And notice how close Bethel is to where?
Jerusalem.
To Jerusalem and to Judah. So in other words, he's trying to prevent his people from going into Jerusalem. It's another country. He wants to be a one-shop, provide everything here in our nation. We don't have to go to Judah for anything. So they're in Bethel. And Bethel had a rich tradition of history, of worship, as it was there that who dreamed? And the Lord revealed himself to Jacob. And Jacob said, the Lord is in this place. And so this became the true rival to worship at Jerusalem, as it was only 11 miles away. So this false worship carried on here. It's mentioned many times in Scripture. And every king of Israel, what does it say? They followed the sins of Jeroboam. It was a great evil in God's sight. Every king of Israel followed in the sins of Jeroboam. And then they added to that, when Ahab married Jezebel, Baal worship came in. So it was kind of a religious pluralism, a mixture of Mosaic worship, Jeroboam's false religion, and Baal worship, all kind of mixed in to make a brand new religion. And that's really what's happened that's what happens to a lot of faiths. It's happening to Christianity right here in America, as different religions come in and people pick and choose from different religions and almost make a new one. Okay, so we'll stop there. Now, next week we have a quiz. Is that true?
Yes.
September 23rd. What do you know? So it isn't that much. Man, I wish I could get further. I was really looking forward to telling you about Shishak and Hazael, but we'll have to stick with Jeroboam and Hadarezer and the deep valleys of Jerusalem and the trade routes that Solomon built. And it's really not that much. So you're going to all do great. And what's a good memory verse, though? We got to get a good memory verse for you all here. Still not sure. Did anybody find a good memory verse?
What about the one with the apes?
Yeah, no. I did like the apes, but just reminded me of King Kong or something. I just got King Kong in my mind when I saw that. You know what? We won't have a memory verse. Okay. Okay.
What?
Okay.
Just kidding.
There you go. That's the last word. Because I can't think of one.